There, that's better. There was a stub on there, and I nibbled it off and cleaned it off flush, and it leaves a little bit of a mark where the pin was, and so I just used a number 11, started a little hole and used 3 or 4 different drill bits, a very small one first. And the reason why is if you run out a little bit, you can always bring it back to center with the next largest drill bit until you get it. So it's like this one is, okay, on the journal here. And you want to be careful you don't drill all the way through, but there's there's a fair bit of meat there. So the rod that I used was 222 1/16 rod. And it's pretty good, it's pretty close, right? Okay, so what I did was I left a little bit of a holding sprue on there, right? I'll cut that off and save that piece. But I wanted to make this, see the notch there? Oh, sorry. See the notch in the rod that's built on the cast part? So you want to do that with this one. See? And how you do that is you just lay it up against it and then just mark it with a pencil. And then you can shove it into the hole, okay? And then you can measure how long this one sticks out. It's 4.5 millimeters, and then 4.5 millimeters there. Mark it, cut it off, and then slip it in. Just make sure that the notch is facing up. Now you can use solvent or CA with this when you mount it. I haven't cut it to size yet, but when you stick it in. Now if you use CA, that'll work, but you better get it right the first time because CA grabs right away. You can use some solvent because you can maybe tweak it and move it a bit, but you can see the idea, right? Okay. And that'll be good enough. So when you slide the truck back in and you slide down there's a key part that sort of locks in on the Atlas truck, then it'll hold it in there nice, okay? Okay, so I want to point something out here that I always find interesting when you build up your own locomotive, like super detail it or kit bash or, or whatever, right? Convert, scratch build, whatever. It's just a lot of fun because you learn about the locomotive that you're building. So do you notice anything like there's a few differences in these trucks here. If you look at these, like these are SD35, right? So if you look at these, look at this truck here, and do you notice anything significant about this one over this one? Okay, so there's a couple of things. Number one, see this, there's 3 brake cylinders on here, right? There's only 2 on these. It's like that on the front and the back. I got a photo underneath here, but I don't want to lift it out yet. But so there's one there, there's one there, and you'll see 1, 2, 3, right? 3 brake cylinders on the actual model. So I'm going to remove this because I'm modeling this. Now, I wondered, why would that be? Okay, the unit has dynamic brakes, which is the only 6-axle dynamic brake that SRY has now on the roster, now that they acquired this SD35 from Montana Rail Link, whom the owner owns both SRY in Canada and Montana Rail Link, among other corporations as well. But so notice here too, right? So when you begin to look at things, it's funny how when we look at locomotives, it's easy to just sort of look at things with the glazed over kind of, eyes, right? But when you really start to look into things, like, see these rods right here? See there? And then you'll see that they're not here. They're not on here. So what I'm assuming is there's brake cylinder here, brake cylinder there. When these brakes kick in, these rods, push rods or whatever, work these brakes in the center axle. It's a mechanical brake rod. That's the only thing I can come up with. Now, if you have a better idea or know better than me, that's fine. Please tell me. But I think that's what that is. Look at the light code rail there, right, too. Anyway, so I'm going to add that with evergreen. I'm going to use a piece of white evergreen strip That's significant. This hose is, which I also do not know. Look how it goes underneath there and rubs against the truck. Like, you know, that's kind of weird, eh? It's funny though, isn't it, eh? So these are quite nice. There's little hoses attached here to the center, so I'm going to nip those off. And then I'm going to remove those, and then I'm going to add these, because I think that's significant enough. It gives the locomotive personality and character. And this is why I say that when you build up a locomotive of your own, whether it be Atlas, Cato, you know, whatever, there's something about it. It becomes more personal to you. You enjoy running it more, if it's a good runner, because you never know, right? But it just makes it more personal. It's hard to explain. It's neat, because you know the locomotive is a one-off. It's unique to you, right? Okay. It looks like this one's bent. This locomotive's had a little bit of abuse. It's been wrestled with before, I can tell by looking at it. I've pulled enough apart in my day. Catos mostly, but you can usually tell when you take a locomotive apart. If you look at it really close, you can tell. Well, you can learn a little bit about its history. Okay. So these I'll get cleaned up too. And then there's these clips on here which they'll get soldered. That's copper. It's all tarnished. See that? See all the oxidization, the tarnishing on there? So that'll get, or those will get soldered too. Those wires. And then these trucks, hopefully they haven't been damaged or removed improperly. Anyway, so we'll do that, clean that all up, because every time I touch it, I get grease on my hands. So, and then I'm handling the body and stuff. I'm in that stage still, where I'm still tweaking things on the body. And then just kind of summarize quick, I need to grind a trough. Can't really do it. Pull this off. I don't want to grease on the chassis here, but so the trick is when you run ditch lights in the pilot like this is why you don't see a lot of factory locomotives with the versions that should have ditch lights in the pilot. They won't have them on the model because they're very complicated to wire, because by the time you drop this chassis down into there, like, where does the wire go? There's no room for it. You have to hog out this frame, and look how thin it is. There's barely enough thickness there to hide the wires, you see. Or you got to hog out a trough on the frame, which in this case it's thick enough it won't affect the integrity of it, but it's a bit messy. You got to pull the frame all apart. Or you drill into the frame and you wire, like you got to build this almost onto the frame and then wire the ditch lights through. But you're not going to be able to remove it that easily. This part anyway, once these are wired. It's tricky. It's easy to do ditch lights that are above the pilot. And lights in the cab pilot, easy peasy for me anyway. But when you're doing this, it's tricky. Okay, and a lot of SRY locomotives are like that. They have the ditch lights in the pilot. So I did the Jeep 9 and the MP15 and the Cato 381, and they were a bear to do. Right, locomotives are a personal battle. Are they worth it? I think so. But for a lot of people, they won't do this because of the trouble involved. But for me, it's part of model railroading, right? Okay. I know people have their opinions and say, well, there is no right way. Yes, there is. There's good practice. And what I mean by that is these parts need to be cleaned, and here's why. If you look at this shaft, this floating shaft here that, you know, it sits in here like this, right? Well, it's like you can hardly pull it out. It's so gummy. Like, look at that. It's just like glue almost. It's like a a glue stick. It's the wrong grease or oil used in this, okay? See? That should almost fall out of there. And it's just like a kind of a sticky, gooey mess. Now, whether that's just from age or I don't know what it is, but it feels like glue, uncured glue. So that needs to be addressed. And I can only imagine what the inside of this truck might look like. It's probably a gooey mess as well. And this is no reflection on the previous owner because I don't know the history. Like, look at my fingers. It's sticky glue. These wheels they all need to be cleaned up. I might have to use a nylon brush or a toothbrush with IPA, but these really need to be cleaned, right? The chassis looks pretty good, but it's got grease all over it too. So that'll have to be cleaned, and I'll probably paint or repaint the sides on this. Okay, so that'll be fun, but it'll be good because when the locomotive is done, she's going to run just like a rebuilt prototype locomotive, right? That's the whole point, okay? So I just wanted to show you this quick. So look at the color of that. And look at the sediment. See all that? Now, some of that would be a little bit of paint stain off the wheels, but a lot of it's grit and grime out of one truck. Okay, I'll just tilt the camera up for a second here. You can see them. This came out of this. Okay, and you wouldn't believe the goop and the stickiness. It was just frightening almost. I don't even know how the locomotive ran, or if it ran good at all. Anyway, so that's the first truck, major cleaning. Now I just actually I got to run and get get a tube of proper lube, which I'm out of, and we'll get these other ones cleaned up, and then we'll put them back together. Nice and cherry, right? Okay, I just wanted to show you how these gearboxes go back together, and what I'm using here for the gear lube is Labelle 106. This is the recommended grease for gears, plastic gears, okay? So I just use a paintbrush with a little, it's a clear, it's almost white clear grease, so it's hard to see on a white background, but you can see I just dab some in onto these little journals first. Okay. You don't want to over grease them. And then I'm going to take these gears, they've all been cleaned up nice with isopropyl alcohol and then dish soap. So drop that one in. Once you do these gearboxes a few times, they're easy. At first they'll seem intimidating, but you get confidence real fast. If you have the exploded view, just take one apart first, leave the other one together, clean it, and put it back together as soon as you can after it's clean. So you'll know. See that there? It's nice now. Those turn nice and smooth. There's a little bit of, you can feel there's just a little bit of resistance, but that's not friction, that's just grease viscosity. Okay, so here's the wheels from the other truck that I've already painted up. You can see there's a little bit of, I used raw umber there, and then a little bit of rust by Vallejo. 2 or 3 washes, so I like the look of them. And then the wheel treads are cleaned up nice. Now I'm just going to show you what I do here. So I only put grease on the axles of the gears when I put this case back together, some of this Labelle 106. And rather than pack grease into these, I'll show you what I do. So I'm just going to pack grease this Labelle 106 into this gear. Each gear, there's 3 axles here. You can clean this grease off easily enough with isopropyl alcohol off your brush. If you want to save it for something else, it's up to you. I just use this one for flux and grease. Or pardon me, brushes just like this for flux and grease, because they're cheap. So you can see I just spread a bit. It goes a long ways, this grease. But you want to put a liberal amount on the gear, like in the teeth. Now I'm just going to drop this in to seat with these other gears, and then as it turns, or as you turn them, the grease will distribute itself among the other gears nicely. Okay. Now we're going to take this cover and it drops in just like that. Very simple there. So you can see see how the wheels float? Quite a bit of movement there, see that? And you'll find that when they roll, like, they're going to seem wobbly, but it's the outside copper frames, which are these. Which are all cleaned up nice, and the ends of these axles have no paint on them. And these mount on the truck itself, and once the trucks go on, they basically support this copper pickup, and the axles run nice and true. Okay. Okay, so I don't want to forget to mention this, and this is a good time when you're doing a re-and-re or a tune-up on your gearboxes or whatever, like I'm doing here. Make sure you take your NMRA gauge. Okay, this is the old one. These are the ones that don't click. They're solid and straight and thick. Okay, this is my old one, and no, I won't give it up because it's better than the new ones they made. But anyway, just check your flanges, okay? And you want to know why? Because I checked all 3 of these particular axles, and one of them was out. One of them was actually sitting up on the inside like that. Like, I couldn't believe how much it was out. So it would have been not tracking as good as it should. So the way you change the gauge is you just grab them both like this, and you just twist them and just turn them a bit as you pull a little bit. And they're quite tight, but they will turn and they will move because there's a plastic sleeve in the center, right, an insulator. And so they're easy to re-gauge. And then you just check them so that those flanges ride inside those notches like that, see? Good plan to check them all, just to give you peace of mind, okay? Okay, so I just want to show you how this worm gear and the bell housing goes together. So when in doubt, make sure you have your exploded view, right? If you get lost with anything, it's quite descriptive. The Atlas ones are excellent. And so you can see this is the area we're dealing with here. And just, it's just a good refresher to make sure everything's going together right. Even though all the parts can only sort of go together one way, really. Now, let me just show you this before I put that worm gear in. Remember earlier on how sticky the bell housing was with this keyed shaft? Okay, so that it's cleaned up real nice with isopropyl alcohol. to make sure that you know, that's there's no residual on that. There doesn't appear to be. So remember how sticky it was? It was like glue, right? It was really bad. So you can see that it slides in there and it should just fall out. There shouldn't be any friction there at all, really. Other than any kind of resistance when we use the Labelle 106, there'll be a little bit of grip there, but that's just from viscosity, and that's what you want. But when it's clean, it should fall out. And then you see how I just polished the end of the worm gear there. And then what I'm going to do is just take some of this regular, this is just light hobby oil that you can get. I don't even know the name of this, but I've been using, like I use this for metal parts where there's brass and bushings. So what I'm going to do here is just put a little drop here. And then I'm going to slide this little washer on, a little thrust washer. And then just a little bit again on the end here. And put that bearing cap on the end. And then I'm just going to open this up a bit. And put a drop in there. Okay. So those spin nice. Now for this worm gear, I'm going to use some of this grease. Because that's where the grease is in here, in these gears. So this is going to mesh with that gear. So we want to use grease because that's what we used when we repacked the gearbox, right? You don't need much here, just a little bit, because it's going to find its own way. So I just put a little bit in the first 2 or 3 grooves in the gear. And then we're just going to drop that in place like that. Okay. So that's all cleaned up and nice now. And that feels good. Now we're going to take a little bit and just stab in a little bit into this universal joint here. This one I didn't take apart because I didn't really need to. There's enough isopropyl. I used clean isopropyl alcohol and stabbed it out thoroughly and cleaned it well. So that's good. And then I'm going to take this little cap or worm cover, and you can see this little locking tabs there. I'm going to push that down. So it snaps into place. And there you can see that that assembly is done. Okay. Okay, so I want to show you how I solder the wire lead to the wheel wiper, the copper wheel wiper. So there were plastic clips on here, so I just chucked those, right? That's just where you push, they push the wire in and push the clip over top and it's pinched on there and good to go. But that's just a rapid assembly process, right? I want to solder these wires because this is a custom recondition or rebuild. And I want to solder these wires. I want to solder everything. Why? Because connectivity or conductivity is already a bit touch and go with locomotives, with the small contact points that we have from the rail to the wheel, etc. So you don't want any other things down the chain link of events that can cause you issues. like dropping a wire or a high resistance. You want a good solid connection because we're already dealing with a very small one from the wheels to the rails, right? I mean, we have current keepers now, which are nice on boards, which you should install if you're doing a locomotive like this, just to help increase the reliability of conductivity. But we want to try to solder all the wires. So I take these leads like this. So these were by Soundtracks, and I like this wire. I believe this is, what gauge is this wire? 30 gauge? Yeah, I think it's 30 gauge, yeah, 28 to 30 gauge. And it's sort of very loose and pliable, and I like that it's flexible, so when it goes up from the truck to the locomotive, it's not stiff. And the reason why I'm redoing them is I'm making them a little bit longer than the original ones because I don't know where the connections are on the board off by heart, and I don't want to be short. I'd rather be too long and I can nip them off and then neatly wire them and solder them to the board, okay? So I'm going to take the wipers, and they've been cleaned up nice. And I'm going to take the ends of these, and what I do is I take my flux like this with a soldering pencil, and I just melt it and clean the tip a bit. But I'll show you that in a second. So now it's all liquid, and I dip the end of the wire, and then I just touch solder, just touch it on with a bit of solder on the pencil, okay? And I just tin it. This makes for a way better solder when you go to solder them both together, which I'll show you. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to take the end of this. You don't have to do this, but I like to fold it in half. Okay. All right, now I'm going to slide it through the top, and then I'm going to fold it over. I did the other three, and they went like silk. This one's going to give me trouble for sure because that's the nature of doing video, but just hang tough. Okay, so I've got it like that, right? Okay, so now I'm going to take my soldering pencil and I'm just going to liquefy some of this flux. I'm just going to clean the tip again so it's liquidy, right? And the nice thing about that is when you dip your brush in, it coats really nice, okay? Come on, stay there. And then it'll apply nice. See that? So just put a glob on there because we can clean that off later with isopropyl alcohol, okay? Just like that. See, it's nice and gushy, mushy, nice and juicy, right? So I'm going to take my soldering pencil and I'm going to clean the tip off. This is a damp rag. Just clean it off like that so it's nice and shiny. Dip it in the flux, which cleans. I'm just going to tin the end of this tip with a bit of solder. And then I'm going to take this wheel wiper and I'm going to touch it onto the wheel wiper, okay? So to heat the copper up first and then touch the wire, and there it is. See that? Nice shiny solder. Then it gets hot on the fingers and you know it's good. So now I'm going to unplug my soldering pencil because remember that, unplug it. I know a guy that had a layout, big N-scale layout, he left his soldering pencil on, went to go answer the phone or make a coffee, whatever he did, forgot to unplug it. At 2 o'clock in the morning he had a bench fire, lost half his layout and part of his garage and all over one of these that he didn't unplug. It just got onto something and started a slow fire. Superheated gas melted half his rolling stock. It was really quite a thing to see. But anyway, so now that I have that done, what I'll do is I'll take another brush that I use for isopropyl alcohol and stab and clean all that flux off. Okay, so it's nice and clean. Why? Because flux has an acidic property to it and you don't want it to corrode the metal, copper, or the solder joint over time because it's a sort of acidic cleaning solution. That's why it makes for really nice solders. It cleans both the wire and the copper while it's heating up, and that's why you just get an awesome no-fail solder, okay? Not a cold solder, a shiny one. If it's super, super dull, really dull flat, it's close to a cold solder, which eventually will break or crack or fall off, right? If it's shiny and you're using flux, you'll always get a really solid weld or solder on your parts, okay? So I'm just going to clean those up, and they're basically ready to install inside the trucks. Okay, how's everybody doing by now? You hanging in there? Okay, so I want to address the side of this frame here because I want to detail it up some. Like you can use SD40 detail side frame kits, SD35. I mean, if it's O scale, I'm going to be picky. HO, no. I just want an indication of details along here. And you can see when this frame slips up into this deck housing, you can see the black line along there. See, my finger runs, and then along here, and then the trucks sit in here. Right, so it's sort of barren there, and I want to add some detail. There's a few other things I've added. I don't know if I mentioned to you, I modified the jack stands because on this particular unit they were modified probably in shop, a shop mod. They drop down more and they're beefier, so they're a little bit different than what you might see on a standard prototype photo where the, you know, when the unit was shopped out and, you know, whatever year it was built, right? So this unit's been rebuilt, and you'll see that when you're studying, especially when you build up your own personal model, like locomotive from prototype photos, which I have. It'll be unique, and you'll notice all these things. So here's the problem with putting detail parts. So I'm going to be using plastic. So rather than glue plastic to metal, like along this rail, because they're going to fall off, because you can only use CA, right? If it's O scale, maybe I'm drilling and using brass, but it's not. And you can buy from scale trains and stuff like that in blister packs. I've seen them with all the details that go in here. So here's the thing. So what I'm going to do is, rather than glue individual pieces on, I'm going to have to scrape the paint off here. Okay, I'll explain this part. This is pretty easy. Just grab one of these types of knives, or even an 11 blade, and just run it along and just scrape it so all the paint comes off, so you're down to the metal. And you want to scratch it up good too, okay? Like, don't be afraid to put lots of little scratches in there to create a texture for a mechanical bond, okay? Because CA loves mechanical bond, right? It's not a chemical bond, it's a mechanical bond. So I'm going to clean off this underframe sill here, and I'm going to show you here with a pencil what I mean. So let's just say this is the metal rail, like this. Okay, I'll draw a fatter view. It's a piece of metal, this side frame. So rather than glue just single pieces, you know, here and there, and right, they're going to get knocked off, guaranteed. First, second time you pick it up or whatever, parts are going to start to shed. So here's the method to my madness, and this is how I've done things in the past. So I'm going to skin this with 10 thou plastic. Okay, I'm going to lay on a strip from evergreen, 10 thou thick, whatever wide that is, and I'm going to score up this metal on the frame, which is here. I'm going to put lots of scratches in it with my number 11 blade or whatever. I'll sacrifice the tip for that. And then I'm going to take my 10 thou and I'm going to do the same. I'm going to score it all up, and I'm going to laminate it on with CA. I'm going to use medium CA. I'm going to laminate the piece on, so it'll be this white strip along there that's all plastic. And I'm going to do the same right here as well, right? I'm going to strip this down where there's going to be piping and some parts coming off, like there's the bell housing, you know, mount bracket. There's other air lines and, you know, oil lines, water lines, whatever. Lots of interesting stuff going on there. So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to line both sides of the frame like this with 10 thou thick plastic. You won't notice the packing out, and there's plenty of clearance when you slip this piece on. You won't know. See, and it'll be way inside the tank here too. There's plenty, so it's not going to pack out the frame. That's going to be noticeable. Now what that will do is create a new surface that I can weld plastic parts to. This will be lined with evergreen plastic, and the advantage is that the whole strip is mechanically bonded. Not little individual parts, plastic. If this was all metal and you start CAing parts on, there's no way it's going to hold. But if you weld all your plastic detail parts to this plastic skin that you've already CA'd on and has all this surface to anchor to, there's a good chance that they're not going to fall off. Like your parts aren't going to fall off of here because they're welded. And for this piece to come off here, the whole piece has to give way, and there's no way it's going to. And even if it does pop a little bit, you can always get super thin CA in behind it and retack it on again. That's why I'm going to do that, okay? Okay, so I just want to show you how the LED is going, but first I'll just show you the frame. So the frame is all skinned up nice with 10 thou by 80. See that? Plastic to metal, so I have a nice, beautiful surface to weld plastic detail parts to. So you have two surfaces, plastic, metal, right? You're going to join them together. So you can use epoxy, but I don't like epoxy personally. You can't use solvent. If this is plastic and this is metal, solvent will melt the plastic, but it won't melt the metal. So you use CA because when you use solvent with plastic to plastic, it's a chemical bond. When you use plastic to metal, you need a mechanical bond. So you scratch the surface of the plastic. I do that by passing a razor saw over top of it a couple of times. That's enough and it'll do. And then the metal, like I showed you how I scribed the metal, I cleaned the paint off and scratched it all up. So when I put the CA in here, it's a mechanical bond. It has all these teeth to bite to it. It really enhances the bond. I don't know what the percentage is, but it improves the mechanical bond dramatically when you scratch up both surfaces, okay? So that's what I did, and now I have this nice, beautiful surface to glue detail parts to. And the 80 thou is just a little bit of a lip over the end, which is fine because there's tons of room here. And that's only like, I would say that's about maybe half a millimeter or so. So I'm pretty happy with that. I checked it out. The clearances are good. Now, remember how I talked to you about how I honed out the frame here for the LED wires? Remember? See? And I did that because I don't want to run the wires over the top. This would make the frame to come off easier because the wires get soldered to the board. But you'd have to grind out some of this, otherwise you'll crush the wires. And if you're going to crush the wires, this frame is not going to sit down flush. There's zero tolerance there. It's designed that way, right? See how there's no room under here. So you'd have to grind and then glue the wire. Oh man, trying to line the wire up and then get this to sit down flush, you'd have a gap of light shining, like just wouldn't look right. It wouldn't seat right. So I grinded those out really nice and then filed them up so there's no sharp edges. So I'll show you how that works. So this will drop in. The only caveat to this style is that you would probably have to, if you needed to troubleshoot extensively, you'd probably have to unsolder the LEDs from the board, but I'll show you how you can get around that. So these wires will go in like this. These wire ends here are pre-tinned as well. There we go. And that's where I get the LEDs from. And if you order them from Tom at Motown Models, these, get the ones with lenses. He attaches the lens for you for a few bucks more or whatever. And believe me, you'll love him for it. Because look at this, when you drill the hole right, they just pull and they seat in perfectly into these Detail Associates plastic ditch light bezels. They're just gorgeous. Okay, so now when you run those through, you got to run these up through the frame because that's where the gearbox goes. So they go up out of the way. There's lots of room there. Now you can leave that loose and just tag these wires with a piece of tape up under the cab somewhere if you want, or you just tuck them up underneath there, because if you ever want to pull the shell, you got to be able to have a little bit of lead to do this. Watch the wire. You see? To clear the shell from the chassis so you can work on it or troubleshoot it. That's the only disadvantage of running them underneath the metal frame that way. Okay? But that's what you have to do in this case if you want to have ditch lights in the Pilot. I've been able to, on some frames, I think I did quite a few Catos in the past, where I cut a groove through here. But what I had to do is, when I cut a groove in the plastic to run it down through so it was flush to the surface so it sits down nice on here, is I had to put a little bit of silicone like over top of the wire just to hold it down in that trough so it wouldn't, you know, walk away and lift this up off the frame. Even a millimeter or two, it won't sit right. In fact, you won't even get the coupler box in if this doesn't sit down flush on top here. Because a lot of times the coupler box is designed to actually hold the front end of the frame to the chassis part, okay? So Motown Models, shout out for him, love it. Tom's a great guy to deal with. He has other stuff there too. He's mostly ESU dealer as well, but his LEDs are excellent. And he gives you all the parts in a beautiful package. And here it is, Nano LED 10 pack with HO lenses, color warm white. These are the ones I use on all my locomotives. Personally, I think, I know it's subjective, but I think they look the most realistic for my kind of modeling or whatever, okay? And you get all this with them too, okay? So check his webpage out, Motown Models, and it's all there for you, all right? Okay, so I just want to point out a couple things here about brass, excuse me, and plastic. And notice how the horn's been mounted. The horn is by CalScale, which I find to be, these are, most of their castings are superb. Now a lot of them are brass. They do plastic now too, but I think like the brass, like initially some of the brass was probably whoever made the molds or designed them was with brass locomotives in mind. Because if you look at any older brass, like, you know, first gen, second gen locomotives, whatever, like they were pretty sparse, right? Like they weren't nearly as detailed and crisp as the plastic shells. So with brass parts, you can solder to the brass model, and if you can use them on plastic. But if you use them on plastic, it helps to pin them into a block, plastic block, and make it part of the model. So I did that with the horn, so now it won't spin and it's solid. So with this particular locomotive, I'll just show you this photo. There's a electronic bell right here. See that? Between this point here on the frame and the fuel filler. It's just right in here, but it's mounted onto the frame, okay? Which on this locomotive is right in here. Okay, so this little brass piece is two parts. So what I did was I clamped this up and I cleaned it up with a file a bit and then fluxed it and then put a spot of solder on top. Okay, so it's solid one piece now. Now, to mount this, you don't want to just, see there's two pins on the back, right? So I don't want to drill into the metal. Besides, it'll be too far back under the frame. You won't see it. Like, it won't be in the right position. So the way I like to do things is I take a plastic block. This is evergreen, just a piece of square scrap stock. And I drill a few holes in it so that this fits tight. I mean really tight. So I can use a tiny bit of thin CA. Okay. To mount this. But it probably won't need it because that is so tight. See the brass pins there? Now I put a little bit of thin, super thin CA just to lock it in place. And this is what I mean by, I only, like that's what CA is designed for. You should always pin the part, then CA. If you just use CA with flush parts, they're probably going to fall off in a few years, or they get bumped and they're gone. But if you pin the part, it's never going to come off. Well, good chance that it will. Like this doesn't even need glue now, but I'll need to put cement solvent here to that white plastic on the frame that I attached. Remember how I skinned this? So now I can actually weld this bell. I'll have to cut the block. Like, I'll just cut it right there. Just cut that off. And the bell will mount. It's upside down now. The bell will mount underneath like that on the block. Okay, so getting pretty much down to all the fine little details before paint. You can see I got the long hood here and the vertical grab handles. I like to just put a spacer in there and then push these wire grab handles in. Okay, and then I bend them down with a pick really tight and then just put a spot of CA on them. There's plenty of clearance. If you got the right nippers, I can't find my little needle nose nippers, you can just nip them off after the CA dries. But yeah, once they're dry and set, you just slip this out. That's about 30 thou thick, I think, that. And then you get your grab handles all nice and even there. Okay?